Daniel Ricciardo is one of the best drivers on the grid. If I'd said this last year, then it would be a pretty uncontroversial standard statement that we'd all agree with. I mean, after all, last year Ricciardo got two very good podiums for Renault and was in the points basically every weekend if you exclude reliability issues. So I think that the struggles that we're seeing this year from Ricciardo are pretty severe and pretty surprising. Now, I don't mean to, in this video, kind of create any drama or hyperbole. But I think that there is a real conversation to be had about Daniel Ricciardo and his F1 future. And I'm not saying that next year he'll retire or anything like that. What I am saying is that this year, as you saw in the title, is make or break for Ricciardo in his F1 career. And I think the reason for that is Lando Norris, because never before in Daniel Ricciardo's career has he suffered this much against a teammate. Of course, he was up against Verstappen in 2016, 17, and 18. But in the first 2 years, he beat Verstappen. And yes, Verstappen was new to Red Bull and new to F1, but still, he was more or less the number one driver at the team. In 2018, Ricciardo did lose to Verstappen on points, but we all kind of knew that he was leaving the team. That relationship had kind of come to an end, so it wasn't necessarily held against him. And losing to Verstappen, there's no shame in that. And whilst obviously there are issues that that part of Ricciardo's issues go beyond Norris, that a lot of it, of course, is adaptation to the car, and we will get onto those things. But I think that fundamentally, we have to understand that ultimately, if Daniel Ricciardo wants to ever win an F1 World title in his career, then he has to beat Lando Norris. Because let's just imagine, right, that for next season, Ricciardo and Norris are the best team, that McLaren have the best package. If Daniel Ricciardo keeps up like this, it won't matter if McLaren have the best package. He will lose the championship to Lando Norris. And I'm not saying that he won't improve, because I think that, for example, his race at Austria and generally his whole year so far isn't obviously the Daniel that we all know and love. But he is going to have to step up massively, because if McLaren do have the fastest car, hypothetically, then if he doesn't improve, Norris will beat him. But if McLaren don't have the fastest car, but Norris still beats him, then in 2-3 years when his contract is up at McLaren, he's not going to have many options. He'll by then be 34, which isn't old. Age won't be the issue. But if his performances aren't there, then that will be the issue. If he's not competing at the same standard as before, if at the age of 34, Lando Norris is beating him and has been beating him for several years, then his driver market value is going to plummet. So if Daniel Ricciardo wants to ever win an F1 World Championship, it's imperative that he beats Lando Norris. And that's why this year is so crucial, because I feel as though if by the end of this season he doesn't start beating his young teammate, then his chances of winning an F1 title are extraordinarily low. And if you look at Ricciardo's career, since leaving Red Bull, you have to question many of his choices. Now, don't get me wrong, McLaren are obviously a step up from Alpine, Renault, but his initial choice to leave Red Bull, in hindsight, of course, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but looking back on it, it's a very, very strange move. Because Red Bull, granted, they didn't have their best year. They had terrible reliability, especially towards the end of the season, and Ricciardo himself suffered a lot from poor reliability. But with that said, Red Bull were always in a far better place than Renault. When Ricciardo joined Renault in 2019, he joined there with the hope of winning championships, or at the very least with building with the team. Let's say that Ricciardo joined Renault to build the team and move it forward. If that's why he joined the team, then he should still be there, because in 2020 they made a very big leap forward, and you could argue that Ricciardo just outperformed the Renault. But realistically speaking, Ocon himself got a podium at Bahrain, and from what we're seeing from Ocon this year, it's not as though, Ricciardo being 2 or 3 tenths up on Ocon is necessarily him completely driving the socks off the car. So I think that we can all agree that Renault were making good progress last year. So his choice to leave Renault last year, to some degree, makes sense, because McLaren technically are the bigger team, they're the better team at the moment. But it brings into question why he first joined Alpine Renault at the time, because if he joined them to build with them and to improve going forward, then he would have stayed. But if he joined Renault to win a championship, then you can't help but think that it was a very naive move. I mean, to make the move to Renault at that time, there was no way they were going to win a championship. At very best, before 2019 began, People thought that Renault could maybe beat Red Bull, who was still adapting with the new Honda engine. But frankly, that was all unrealistic, and Renault finished in the midfield, which really is where you'd expect them to be. And I only bring this up because Daniel Ricciardo's career is now in a very, very weird place. When he first burst onto the scene in 2014 at Red Bull, of course, he joined F1 in 2011, but his first kind of standout year was without doubt 2014, where he beat the four-time champion Sebastian Vettel. And it wasn't just four-time champion Vettel, it was four-time champion Vettel, who had just won four in a row at his own team. So to see Ricciardo come out of Red Bull and finish third in the standings, lead the team, it was a really big thing for him in his career. And it really put him on the map as one of F1's best. And he's kept that title for a long time. But as we're seeing the likes of Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz evolve and really establish themselves, Ricciardo could start to lose his shine, to lose his allure. And as you can see, I'm not trying to say that Ricciardo's a terrible driver. I expect him to improve in the next few rounds. I think that what we saw in France is a good indication of where he could be at McLaren. So I can predict confidently that Daniel Ricciardo will improve this year and get closer to Norris. But I cannot predict, as I did before the year began, that he will beat Norris. I don't know. I genuinely don't. And that's the big concern for Ricciardo. Because it's not so much that in 2 years he'll have to retire. Of course not. But if Norris is the better driver between those two, then he won't really have many top tier options because he'll be a lot older than Lando and he'll be a generally older driver. But age isn't necessarily the big issue, it'll be his form, because if Lando is beating him consistently, with all of the good drivers currently on the grid, Norris, Leclerc, Alonso, blah blah blah, Gasly, etc., all these guys, they'll all have a higher market value than Ricciardo. Alonso, yes, he'll be old, so maybe that was a poor example, but you get my point. Ricciardo won't be the guy that you talk about when discussing driver transfer news. For many, many years, when people said who can replace Kimi or Seb at Ferrari, the most common answer was Daniel Ricciardo because, of course, number one, he's partly Italian, but mainly he's young, he's quick, and people thought that he could lead the team forward. But if you were to say now, Ricciardo to Ferrari, you'd say that both Leclerc and arguably even Carlos Sainz would be doing a better job. And that's part of the big issue for Daniel Ricciardo. Whilst we, of course, give him some leeway and we give him some time, and again, I'm not saying he's a bad driver, I'm not saying that. But whilst we do give him some time to adapt, that excuse can only last for so long, because the likes of Sebastian Vettel, Fernando Alonso, and Carlos Sainz, even Yuki Tsunoda, have shown more pace compared to their teammates than Ricciardo has. I mean, Alonso's already beating Ocon, or at the very least on a similar level. Sebastian Vettel's got on the podium and is on a similar level to Stroll, even though that kind of varies between different races. Carlos Sainz has been extremely impressive because Ferrari obviously have a history of having pretty, I would say, limited number two drivers, quote, number twos. But Sainz isn't really a number two at Ferrari. He's adapted really quickly. He's been on Leclerc's pace basically from round one. So the point I'm trying to make here is that Ricciardo has other drivers in F1 who are all adapting to new teams. So if he doesn't adapt soon, then we may have to start getting concerned. Now, I do think that it's just a matter of time until McLaren and Ricciardo sort things out and until Ricciardo's back. I'm not saying that Ricciardo's career is over. I'm not doing a Nico Rosberg. But what I am saying is this. I don't know. I am no longer certain that if McLaren have a car to win the championship, that Daniel Ricciardo will be able to capitalize. I don't know that. Because if they have the quickest car, let's say for next season, McLaren do a Mercedes, they dominate, they're the fastest, the quickest, etc., all of the above. I am not certain that Ricciardo will recover enough to beat Lando Norris. I have no doubts that he'll be a lot closer, but given how well Lando is doing, and given how much, well, he's a very young driver, Lando is going to be improving, and really Lando Norris is making steps forward. Daniel Ricciardo is kind of trying to go back to where he was. And there's a possibility that even if Ricciardo finds a bit of pace, Norris, because of how well he's improving, may be too quick for him anyway. So I think that this is a very crucial year for Ricciardo, for his confidence, but also for his career. Because I think how the second half of this year goes will be a precedent for the rest of his career. If after Hungary or by Spa, from the second half of the year, Ricciardo is on pace, on the same speed as Lando Norris, and beating Lando back to the levels that we'd expect from him, then we can all say, okay, Ricciardo's got plenty of time, and even if McLaren aren't quick enough next year, he'll have other options. But if Norris is faster than him, then I think there'll be questions to be had. Thank you so much for watching. I've been experimenting with a new kind of video today. Honestly, I was ultra nervous about making this, and maybe there's nobody who's even watched to the end. But if you have, then please do like the video, subscribe if you're new, leave a comment below so I can hear your thoughts, and until then, I'll see you guys next time. Take care.